Hi, my name is Phil. I like to talk about politics. In this video, I'd like to discuss the victory earlier this week for the Extinction Rebellion protesters who were denied their rights by London's Metropolitan Police. But first, if you'd like to receive notifications of upcoming content, then please click the subscribe button and then the bell icon next to it. So Extinction Rebellion is a group I've talked about before as being well-intentioned, but with adopting flawed strategies, I would say, that haven't a hope in hell of achieving their aims. We're at it again last month, basically. However, although it's a case of hearts in the right place but not their brains, they were nonetheless treated unfairly in many regards by the police, and it was vital that the court case has confirmed that that took place. So the basic facts of the situation. So unlike many other protest groups, Extinction Rebellion were not attempting to raise awareness. This is something their methods can't possibly do because although they will inevitably get into the news, the reports in the popular media are entirely about their actions and not one line about the environmental message. They are not pushing an environmental message. Their strategy is different. Their thinking, I suppose, is that the government don't listen to the people anyway, so what's the point in trying to convince the population of a climate emergency? And I might go along with that. It could be argued that the people willing to open their eyes to the situation are basically already seized of this message from other groups. So Extinction Rebellion aimed to engage with the government directly by causing enough problems for them that they would be forced to listen. Unfortunately, this is where I think they are badly misjudging the situation. So last month they planned and largely took part in a nearly 2-week period of disruptive protests in London. The aim was not to cause harm as such. In fact, their call to action specifically said they were not going to do bad things to bad people. They are responsible enough not to attract vigilantes. No, their plan was simply to stretch police resources to breaking point. Their words. Obviously, a major disruptive process, such as the massive People's Vote marches that have taken place this year, do require a great deal more police resources than is required on a normal day in the metropolis. So, 2 weeks of very disruptive protests, it was reasoned, would push the resources of an already depleted police force dry. The government would panic and at least sit down and listen to the protesters' spokespeople. But this is where I fear their brains have gone walkies. The thing is that the Conservative government have reduced police numbers by 21,000 since coming to power and closed down 600 police stations. As a result, they've seen crime soaring during the last decade. Does this sound like a government that gives a crap about stretched police resources or the consequences of it? And the current leadership is the worst of the lot. And let's think about the major players here. We have the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. And then the Home Secretary, Priti Patel. These are not people, if I can call them that really even comprehend reality, much less care about it. So the plan was flawed, but operationally it would certainly work. Now, without condoning it, which I robustly do not, I do sort of understand the bind the police were in here. So they were faced with a group whose operational objective was to knacker the Metropolitan Police. Their plan of attack, so to speak, could certainly allow them to meet this objective. The main aim of getting the government to act as a result of this was a non-starter, and the senior police officers knew it. They know that stretching their piss-poor resources further means an even more demoralised force, fewer resources to deal with the prevention of crime, as well as dealing with it inadequately when it does happen. So they had to try and stop these protests sapping their strength. Now, I completely understand that and have every sympathy. But if you don't have a lawful way to guarantee dealing with it, then you just have to put up with the best lawful method that you have at your disposal. So when the superintendent in charge decided to impose an order using the Public Order Act 1986, the relevant section of the Act, in the view of the superintendent, allowed the police to issue the following order. And it said, any assembly linked to the Extinction Rebellion autumn uprising, publicised as being from the 7th of October to the 19th of October at 1800 hours, must now cease their protest within London, MPS and City of London police areas by 2100 hours, 14th of October 2019. In other words, if a couple of people so much as walked into London with a placard promoting Extinction Rebellion, they would be in breach and could be arrested. And I gather quite a lot were. And don't get me wrong. For example, the guy who stood on the tube train was absolutely out of order, needed arresting. I wasn't necessarily in favour of a load of people pulling him down. That's dangerous. But he shouldn't have been up there. That made no sense either. It did nothing for his operational objective. The causing disruption by simply congregating in large numbers, however, was not in itself unlawful necessarily. It was peaceful, and yes, where anyone is attempting to cause damage to public property or unlawfully blocking access, then the police are not only within their rights, but it is their duty to remove them, arresting them if necessary. But what they can't do is just go around arresting people before they've caused any trouble and when you don't really have good reason to suspect that they will. Simply being part of a group where some you know will cause trouble doesn't mean they should all be tarred with the same brush. Guilt by association. Dreadful concept. So part of the judgment from the High Court read, separate gatherings, separated both in time and by many miles, even if coordinated under the umbrella of one body, are not one public assembly within the meaning of section 14.1 of the 1986 Act. So what they're basically saying is the police were trying to say, look, any Extinction Rebellion protest, we're just going to call an assembly, even if it's actually lots of individual assemblies all spread out and all on different days and all the rest of it. And the judge is saying, no, that's not what the Act says. Now, it has to be said that a more senior police officer did remove the order 4 days later, recognising that it was taking the piss, though the fact that it took 4 days might be an indicator that they did really want to try and get away with it. But what makes this judgment really important for me is not so much that it allows Extinction Rebellion to carry on with their work, as it would for some. As I say, as far as I'm concerned, their reasoning is flawed, their plan cannot work. They can never possibly meet their primary objective of forcing the government to act, because they are attacking something that the government don't care about, a public service. Maybe they should try disrupting some imports of champagne if they want to get them to the negotiating table. Now, why it's important to me is that if a police officer could use this act to prevent an assembly in this way, well, what would there be to stop the government ordering the police to ban future anti-Brexit protests, or even just anti-government protests? I mean, the People's March, for example, there was 1 million people marching on London. You might have said, well, we think 1 million people marching there may cause trouble and it could cause an awful lot of damage, and 1 million people is hard to police, so we need to ban it. Now, of course, there was no damage when these millions marched, and on the million on 2 separate occasions marched, and there wasn't difficulty. The police had no trouble at all with them. But the government could say that. They could say that and maybe ban it. So it was important that this couldn't just happen. And it is serious. Some of the extremists in the Tory party have already been drawing up plans to attack freedoms of speech and expression once we leave the EU, if they get a majority in Parliament. Because if these lunatics ever do take control, forget about any help from the courts. If we do not have basic protections from the EU in place, I mean, judges can only make decisions based on points of law, can't they? If a future Conservative government outside of the EU declares Extinction Rebellion an illegal group, then there will be no more protests with them. And the courts won't be able to lift a finger to protect their rights to freedom of speech because they won't have any. There are such things as banned groups and good reasons for it. What's not good is if the government can just arbitrarily decide which ones are. If they declare protests above a certain number illegal, like if there's more than 200 people, well, that's too big. You can't protest with more than 200 people. Then that would be that. If they make a law saying that criticising the government is an unlawful act, punishable by imprisonment, then that would be the law. These laws exist in other countries. Why wouldn't they in the UK? At the moment, they wouldn't in the UK because it would fall foul of EU law. We're not in the EU, and we're not bound by EU law and subject to the ECJ, well, can do what they like if they get a majority. But in the meantime, it is vital that whilst our laws are still relatively on the side of the individual's rights, neither the government nor the police are able to circumvent those rights, just because it seems the most efficient solution to a problem. As I say, I have every sympathy with the police's predicament. They knew that this was not going to be a limited protest because the government are never going to back down, because why would they? It's not actually hurting them. So they knew that it's just knackering their resources, but at the same time, that doesn't give you the right to go, I can't think of a lawful solution, so we'll just bend the law a little. No. Now, just to be clear as well, to end with, we're not saying that Extinction Rebellion were not breaking the law with their protest. We're not saying that they shouldn't have been arrested. What we're saying is that not everyone who was arrested should have been arrested because not everyone was breaking the law. That is the distinction, and that is what the judges have said. So I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, then please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, then please click the Patreon link for details as well. And until next time, I'll see you later.